Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor Ipshita Bansal from BPS Women's University, Sonipat. Today, I am going to talk about barriers of communication from the paper Business Communication. After completing this module, the students will be able to understand the concepts of business communication, identify the barriers to communication, and lastly, explain how barriers can be overcome. So, before coming to the barriers of communication, let's revise what we learned about communication. Communication is the process of exchanging the messages, ideas, information, etc. from one person or party to another person or party through some channel. Communication is effective only if the receiver understands the message in the same sense as it is sent by the sender. If any kind of obstacle disturbs any step of the communication process, the message will not be transmitted to the receiver in the same way as the sender wanted it to be sent. Such kinds of obstacles are called barriers to communication. Due to such barriers, managers in an organization face various problems because communication becomes ineffective as information loses its originality. So, the manager must find out such barriers and take effective steps to overcome them. Barriers to communication can distort the quality of the information and purpose of the message being conveyed by the sender, which may result in ineffectiveness of the flow of communication or an outcome that is unacceptable. There are various kinds of barriers that affect the communication process in the organization. All the work in the organization is initiated through communication. So it is essential for managers to locate such barriers and remove them timely. So, what is the meaning of communication barriers? Communication barriers are obstacles and problems involved in effective exchange of ideas or thoughts which retard the information being properly perceived by the receiver. Or, in other words, we can say that communication barriers are the factors which affect the effective exchange of ideas from the sender to the receiver and disturb the flow of communication in the organization. As we can see in the picture, the sender of the message transfers a message with the expectation that the receiver will receive the message, interpret it, and act accordingly. But sometimes message is not always decoded by the receiver in the same way as the sender encoded it. Some factors and difficulties distort the flow of the message, its interpretation and understanding. Such factors and difficulties, as depicted in the diagram in the form of noise, is known as barriers of communication. Noise here does not only means unwanted sound but also all the factors which hamper or distort effective flow of communication. Barriers to effective communication are basically of four types. First, semantic barriers, which consist of badly expressed messages, symbols with different meanings, faulty translations, unclarified assumptions, technical jargon, and body language and gesture decoding. Second, psychological barriers, which consist of premature evaluation, lack of attention, loss by poor retention, and distrust. Third type of barriers are organizational barriers. Organizational policy, rules and regulations, status difference, complex organization, and organizational facilities. The fourth type of barriers are personal barriers, which are fear of challenge to the authority, lack of confidence in the subordinates, and unwillingness to communicate. First type of communication barriers are semantic barriers. When the sender converts ideas and thoughts in the form that will be understood by the receiver through the use of words, sign, figures, etc., there is a possibility that the same words and symbol have different meanings and different people interpret them differently. These words, signs, and figures used in the communication are interpreted by the receiver as per his or her knowledge and understanding, which creates doubtful situations. There is always a possibility of misinterpretation of the intentions of the sender of the message or understanding its wrong meaning. This happens because the information is not sent in simple and clear language. So, the main causes of semantic problem can be: in communication, there is always a possibility of wrong interpretation of messages due to wrong choice of words, the omission of needed words, or frequent repetition of words, or wrong construction of the sentence. If the sender uses a wrong word or arranges the words in a sentence in the wrong sequence, then meaning of the whole message will change completely. This can be called linguistic problem, which is the most important barrier in communication. Generally, language-related communicational barriers arise due to lack of common language, including words, symbols, and signs, poor vocabulary, poor grammar, and improper use of punctuations. Symbols or words with different meanings. In English dictionaries, a word can have same pronunciation but different spellings and meanings, such as price, price, principle, principle, right, right. Here the spellings are different, but the pronunciation is more or less same. In many cases, a word can have the same spelling but can have different meanings in different sentences, such as right, value, etc. There is always a chance that the receiver may perceive the meaning of the word not intended by the sender. If the receiver interprets the meaning as not intended, the communication will become meaningless. For example, in English, the word right can have different meanings in the following sentences. A. One should fight for one's right. Here, right means what is due to a person or what is a genuine or lawful demand. B. A manager will be successful only when he takes the right decision at the right time. Here, right means what is correct. Second example, in some words have the same pronunciation but have different meanings. For example, A. As per the principle, this is not the correct way of doing it. Here, principal is the head of the institution. B. As per the principle, this is not the correct way of doing it. Here, principle may mean a fundamental truth or a rule which has to be or is usually followed. Faulty translation. In an organization, a lot of information has to be transmitted from one point to another. Transmission is done as per the knowledge and understanding of the people involved who act as receiver at one point and sender at another. Many times, The information has to be translated from one language to another for easy understanding of the receivers. For example, office orders received from top management to be communicated to shop floor employees. In this process of translation and modification of the message as per the understanding capabilities of the receiver, the meaning of the message too may be modified and wrong message may be transferred to the receiver. So, faulty translation can prove a barrier in effective communication. Unclarified assumptions. In an organization, when a sender sends a message, he may assume that the receiver knows the background information relevant to the message, and it is enough to inform the receiver about the main subject matter. In reality, the receiver may not be knowing the background information and so will not be able to interpret the message as intended. Consequently, the implementation of the message will not be as desired by the sender of the message. For example, manager may send a memo to the subordinate. You may proceed with further action as decided in the last meeting of the committee. Here, the manager assumes that the receiver, that is his subordinate, knows all about the decision taken in the last meeting, which might be a week back. In reality, the subordinate may be knowing the decision taken in the meeting held 20 days back. As for him, that might be the last meeting because he was on leave during the last week. In such a scenario, the interpretation and action on the part of the receiver will be faulty. Mostly, it has been observed that employees working in an organization are affiliated with some specialized groups such as biologists, industrial engineers, production development executives, quality controllers, information technology professionals, managers, etc. Such specialized groups use their technical jargon, which, if used in communication with the people not belonging to that group, may not be understood by them. Hence, there will be communication gap and the message will not result in the desired action, as we can see in the picture. So, technical jargon can be a barrier in communication. Therefore, when a message has to be sent, the sender should ensure whether the receiver will be able to understand the technical jargon or not. If not, then the language should be suitably modified to fall within the understanding level of the receiver. For example, the sender of the message is saying, "The problem is your modem can't interface with your ISP because your RJ cable needs upgrading." The receiver is not able to understand the message fully because the sender is using technical jargon. So, the receiver asks, "Will it cost much?" because it seems as if a very complex instrument needs to be purchased. So, the sender is saying, "That depends on whether you know I just said you need a longer phone cord." So, if the sender uses the simple language, that is just saying you need a longer phone cord, the understanding by the receiver will be much more, and he will understand that this is the thing which will not cost too much. Body language and gesture decoding. When some information is transmitted through body language and gestures, there is always a possibility of misinterpretation of the information by the receiver. If the gesture of the sender does not match with the verbal message, then the receiver may get confused and misinterpret the message. For example, if someone answers to a question by moving his neck, it does not indicate clearly whether its meaning is yes or no. Another example: if a manager is scolding an employee for negligence, but there is a smile on his face, then the worker will get confused and will not be able to grasp the severity of the situation. To take another example, scratching the head can mean a number of things depending on the other gestures that occur at the same time. So we must always look at gesture clusters for a correct reading. For example, just scratching the head may mean dandruff or forgetfulness or sweating, uncertainty, or even lying. The second type of communication barriers are psychological barriers. In order to make communication effective, it is essential to study about the psychological conditions of both sender and receiver. A person's attitude, perception, beliefs, and value systems play an important role in encoding and decoding of messages. This applies to messages within the organization or messages encoded or decoded by the external stakeholders like suppliers, financiers, customers, etc. Also, if any of the party, whether it is the sender or the receiver, is emotionally or psychologically imbalanced, it can considerably affect the smooth process of communication. The various emotions in an individual, like anger, scorn, obsession, grief, etc., can also hamper the smooth flow of communication and distort the encoding or decoding of the messages. Lack of attention. Sometimes the receiver is busy with some other task or his mind is preoccupied with some other thought, due to which he does not listen to the message with complete attention. Consequently, the message is not received as intended by the sender. Hence, this may be a psychological barrier in effective communication. Some extreme emotions of human beings, such as anger, hatred, or elation, can also distract the attention of the receivers, creating a barrier in effective flow of communication. For example, when a worker is giving a suggestion regarding method of increasing productivity, the manager is preoccupied by his thoughts related to the unpleasant conversation he has had with his boss regarding below average performance of his unit. So, the manager does not pay attention to what the worker is saying and asks him to leave. In such a situation, the worker will feel that the manager is not open to ideas from juniors, so may not share any suggestion with the manager in future. Loss by transmission and poor retention. The quality of the message is decreased when it passes through many people. The actual form of the message is changed with each transmission from one person to another. This is due to the filtration and loss of information. It happens especially in case of oral communication due to carelessness of human beings and lack of their ability to retain the complete information for a long time. Let's take an example. A client may communicate orally to the sales executive the product specifications for the supply of a product. Due to carelessness of receiver or lack of his ability to retain the complete information for a long time, he conveys incorrect specification to the production department, because of which wrong product is supplied to the client, which may lead to damaging the relationship with the client. Hence, we see loss of information during transmission and poor retention by the receiver becomes a hindrance in effective exchange of information. Another psychological barrier is distrust. The communication process will be successful only when both the sender and receiver have trust in each other. If there is no mutual trust, the communication process will not be effective because the receiver will not decode and interpret the message as it was intended by the receiver. If they don't have mutual understanding, then they will not understand each other's point of view, which could be a barrier in communication process. Let's take an example. This barrier may be very prominent in case of individuals having different worldviews or belonging to different cultural backgrounds, or when two different groups of employees have to work together in a situation of a merger or an acquisition of companies. Third type of communication barriers are organizational barriers. Organizational structure greatly affects the capability of employees as far as the communication is concerned. Some major organizational hindrances in the way of communication can be organizational policy, rules and regulation, status consciousness, complexity of the organizational structure, or organizational facilities or the lack of it. The first organizational barrier is organizational policies. Organizational policies are the guidelines under which all the decisions will be taken in the organization. For example, the organization may have the policy that formal communication will only be through written form in the organization, which will follow a prescribed path for the flow of communication. Now, let's take an example from the organizational context. There might be a message which can be communicated instantly, directly to the person concerned, orally to ensure faster action. But due to organizational policy, the message will be transmitted in a written form through a longer and more time-consuming path, with the possibility of modification of the original message. As a result, the intended message may be lost in the process and work may be done differently or delayed unnecessarily. Next organizational barriers are rules and regulations. Rules and regulations are the strict plans of the organization which must be followed by each person in the organization. Sometimes the rules and regulations of the organization regarding communication may become a hindrance in effective flow of communication. The rules concerned with communication may be regarding the subject matter or following a particular medium. For example, there may be a rule in the organization that only if there is a negative comment in the appraisal of an employee, it will be communicated to that employee. That too through written communication, so that the employee can improve herself for future appraisal. Hence, because of this rule, the employee who receives appreciation or positive comments in her appraisal will not come to know about it. This is not very desirable situation, as receiving praise motivates people and organization. Because of this rule, loses on this opportunity to motivate its employees. Also, feedback on the appraisal is always more effective through oral communication, especially if the objective is not only to judge but also to improve the performance. Next barrier is status. All the employees in the organization are divided into different levels as per their authority and responsibility relationship. The formal hierarchy of the level of employees may become an obstacle in effective communication, especially when the flow of communication is from the bottom level to the top level, or if the communication is upward. Secondly, sometimes the top level employees don't have credibility in the information supplied by lower level employees. For example, if a message is sent by a foreman to the manager about the conduct of an executive, there may be an insecurity in the mind of the manager that the information may have errors. But if the similar message is sent by a senior executive to the manager, then the manager will be more ready to believe the information. Hence, the status of an employee may also put a barrier in the flow of effective communication. Another organizational barrier is complexity in organizational structure. In an organization, the complexity of organizational structure is determined on the basis of number of management levels. Higher the number of levels, greater will be the complexity in the structure, and consequently, effectiveness of the communication will be brought down. If the organizational structure is more complex, then the quality of the message will be distorted because the information loses its originality with each transfer of information from one level to another level. A complex structure may look like the following on paper, which is two-dimensional, but actually it may feel like the following for the sender and receivers, but actually may feel like the following for the senders and receivers, three-dimensional and very complex. The fourth type of communication barriers are personal barriers. There are also various kinds of barriers which are directly concerned with the receiver and the sender of communication as individuals. Such kind of barriers are called personal barriers, which will affect the effective flow of communication. First type of personal barrier is fear of challenge to the authority. Often in organization, the senior people discourage upward communication due to the insecurity that if subordinates are given a chance to speak their minds or allowed to give suggestions, then the weaknesses of the senior managers will be revealed in the eyes of their colleagues or superiors. Sometimes employees at higher levels also suppress upward communication for the fear that their authority might be challenged and they will lose control over their subordinates. Such kind of insecurities can become an obstacle in the communication process. Second type of personal barriers to communication are lack of confidence in subordinates. Higher level employees may lack faith in the capability of their subordinates, so may not pay attention to their suggestions or information provided by them. Hence, they deliberately avoid the opinions and suggestions of their subordinates. As a result, morale of the employees is decreased, which may become a barrier in effective flow of communication. Third type of personal barrier to communication is unwillingness to communicate. Sometimes subordinates avoid communicating with higher level employees as they fear that the information which they share, especially the negative one, may not be liked by their superiors as it might reflect on their managerial skills. Even if there is communication regarding such issues, the information is modified and molded to suit the inclination of the superiors. Also, when the senior managers don't invite suggestions from their juniors, the juniors may be wary of offering suggestions for fear of being rebuffed. Hence, such issues become a barrier in communication, which might be harmful for the organization in the long run. Communication barriers are like a brick wall, which, if not broken timely, will result in negatively affecting every function of the organization, be it human resource management, sales and marketing, operations, research and development, public relations, or maintaining goodwill of the organization among all its stakeholders. So, ways have to be found through this wall. Since communication is the lifeblood of an organization, it is very important that efforts are made at organization level as well as at individual level to overcome the communication barriers. So, efforts at individual level and intervention at organization level are required to identify the barriers hindering the communication flow within and outside the organization so that proper action can be taken to address the problems related to effectiveness of communication. Although it is not possible to eliminate all the barriers, effort should be made to minimize to the extent possible the barriers to communication in the interest of the organization. So, what are the strategies to overcome the communication barriers? First is well defined organizational policy. Second, asking for feedback. Third, restructuring. Fourth, employee training and development. Fifth, developing informal relationships. Sixth, choosing appropriate media. Seventh, reducing information overload. And last, communication audit. Let's take each one by one. First, well defined organizational policy. Organization should have well-defined, clear, and widely circulated communication policies related to the do's and don'ts of the communication within the organization as well as communication with external stakeholders. Such policies will minimize misunderstanding and promote effective flow of communication. For example, it should be clearly mentioned in the relevant section of the HR policy that who will provide the appraisal feedback to the employees at various levels of the organization. Or it should be a part of the sales manual that what information should be given about the company to the prospective client in sales presentation by an executive. Second, asking for feedback. In order to make communication effective, managers should actively seek feedback from subordinates about their communication messages. Feedback reduces the probability of confusion and discrepancy between the messages sent and received. For example, after summing up the decision taken at the end of the meeting of a team or committee, the convener or the chairperson of the committee may ask the members one by one to share with others what are the tasks that they have agreed to undertake within a particular deadline. Third strategy is restructuring. To facilitate an enabling communication environment, effort should be made to simplify the complex organization structure through reorganization activities. For example, reorganization may involve reducing authority layers and establishing clear authority and responsibility relationship, or adopting open door communication policy by superiors with respect to their subordinates, or starting the use of technology like internet to deliver the messages through emails for faster dissemination of information. Fourth strategy is employee training and development. To make the employees efficient in communication, organizations can arrange various training and development programs for them. For example, when new employees join the organization, they should be given orientation, seminars with respect to company mission, goals, policies, rules and regulations, procedures, etc. This can greatly enhance their future communication effectiveness in the organization, as well as with respect to the external stakeholders. The employees can also be provided training on computers and other electronic means of communication. Fifth strategy is promoting informal relationship. Informal relationship can play a vital role in promoting communication. Hence, an effort should be made to encourage informal communication along with the formal communication. For example, along with sending a circular to all the members of the department inviting suggestions for a solution to a particular problem, the manager should also reach out to the people and talk to them personally for gaining insights from them. This will ensure the return communication from the members, speed up the communication, help build informal relationship, and motivate employees. Sixth strategy is choosing appropriate media. Effectiveness of communication largely depends on the suitability of media. So, the media should be selected considering some factors such as the importance of the message, communication environment, knowledge of the receiver, etc. For example, if the message is urgent and requires immediate action, oral communication over the telephone is the most suitable medium to communicate. Or if the brand and product information has to be given to the rural people, then wall paintings in bright colors may be the best medium of communication. Seventh strategy is reducing information overload. Communication system becomes defective if more information flows at a time than is necessary or is possible. To resolve this problem, only necessary information should be conveyed. For example, information overload can be reduced by decentralizing routine decision making so that communication channels can be shortened to make the communication faster and effective. The eighth strategy is communication audit. To improve communication in the organization, it is advisable to conduct communication audit at regular intervals. Communication audit means examining and evaluating communication networks, functions, and effectiveness periodically. For example, A detailed communication audit in an organization may lead to the top management to realize that formal communication channels are designed in such a manner that only downward communication is possible in the organization, which is hampering recognition of young talent. So, after communication audit, top management may initiate the process of building communication networks which facilitate upward communication for better growth of the company. So, students, we have understood the ways through which the communication barriers can be minimized. Such efforts have to be continuous, and the management should be fully committed to work on these measures. Now, let us summarize what we have learned in this module. As we discussed in the preceding sections, communication is considered as the lifeblood of organization. It is the way through which the details of the goals, objectives, strategies, orders, and policy of the organization are explained to the employees of the organization. And by way of the communication, the organization comes to acquire the information about their rivals, the opportunities offered by the markets, and the threats to the organization. So, communication effectiveness is a must for organization. But sometimes the messages does not get decoded by receivers in the original form as it is encoded by senders because of some kind of barriers. These barriers are called communication barriers. These barriers can be semantic, psychological, organizational, or personal. The barriers to communication must be identified as early as possible by the people concerned so that appropriate steps can be taken to remove these barriers. So, information can be communicated effectively in the organization as well as outside the organization. Thank you.